Hello everybody and welcome back to day 94 of 100 days of code. I can taste the success. I can literally taste it. I can't wait. I'm so excited. Oh, it's going to be amazing. Just can't wait to sleep in. Stay in bed on day 101. Well, I'll still probably get up early, but the fact that I can sleep in, although I won't, I'll probably still do things, but it's just to have back 2 hours of my life every day, because it takes an hour to do them. And look, I'm delighted to be doing them. It's been fantastic to be here. I'm very proud of myself, and I taste the end. Really, it's going to be amazing. It's already amazing. I'm very, very happy. So yeah, fabulous guys, really great stuff. So let's get into this here. What we were just doing yesterday was we just fetched our data back from our GitHub, which is super duper. So we have our data coming back, and now what we're going to do is add a spinner. So great, we're going to sort that out now. So first thing we're going to do is display these users on the page, and then we're going to get our spinner up and running on our page as well. So I'll just fire up the project here so you can see what we are doing. And what we were doing was here in this return statement. So yesterday we just set up this fetch statement to get our users from the back end in our users results. So we want to show our users on the page here, and we're getting these users from the GitHub repository. There's an API that you can hit and you can get back all of the GitHub users. So that's exciting, that's great. So if I had have known that, I probably would have messed around with the GitHub API previously, because I've used test APIs and stuff, but this is cool. Seeing people's profiles, there's a lot of data to interact with there. So really cool. So here is our project, how it currently looks. We have our nav bar, we have our home and our about buttons, which are routing and through React Router DOM. And then we have our array of user results here coming back. So I think that came twice because I went and came back to the page. So if we just go once, we can see there our array of users, and we have 30 users there. So we're going to put this into action and display these on the page. Now we have them coming back from the GitHub API. So exciting stuff, guys, exciting stuff. The big excitement is it's day, whatever day it is, I can't even remember, 94. So great. So here we're going to do class name and add in some classes here. So this is with Tailwind CSS, which just gives you inbuilt styling. So you just type in the classes. So grid call calls 1. And then gap 8. Bada bing. Yep. And we want Excel dot grid calls and 4. Cool. So, and yep. So this is how we can do responsiveness on our particular item here on this div, which is the return of all of the user results. So this is our component that has all of the user results in it, and this tells it how we want the columns to be on a large screen. We can add in, on an extra large screen, we can add in the values for a large screen, and then we can add in the values for a medium screen. So for large we're going to say 3, and for medium we are going to say 2. So we'll save that. Perfect. So my heater was just on, but it's a bit too warm in here, so So great, so in here now we can perform some JSX code that's going to evaluate and do something. So what we want to do is take this users, our list of users, and map over them. So go through them, and as we go through them, take out each user and do something with it. So absolutely perfect. Okay. So what we want to do when we have each user is to return a h3 and just return the user.login. So each time we go around this map of users, so we take out each user as we map through it, we want to display the user login. So we're going through, iterating through and picking out each user from the list of users. And there we go, we can see each user's login name. So great, we have something showing there, that's brilliant. And what about, well, we said we wanted different columns based on the screen size, but we don't have enough information in here yet to cause those screen sizes to collapse and show us different columns. So when we add in a bit more information, we'll see that functionality from the Tailwind CSS classes that we've added in here. But at the moment it's so skinny that, you know, it's only one column. It looks like it's only one column. So we'll just continue. Okay, yes, yeah. So one thing we should see there, which we're seeing now, is that this should be displayed in a grid. So because we've we've passed in the Tailwind class here of grid, so when we do expand and contract, we see that it transforms into a grid format. So we can see that much at the moment. So that's great. Yeah, and let's keep going. So we'll also just take care of the possibility that our page is still loading. So we'll say if it isn't loading, then we want to display our information here. So I'll just open this up and we'll move our return statement inside. Okay, yep. And then we'll say else and we'll return a h3. Well, it shouldn't be no users, it should be loading ... sorry. So what this is saying is if we are not loading, then return our user map here and map over each of them. So I just like to have my parentheses in there really and then lay this out a bit better. Okay, well it didn't like that, so I'll just keep what we were doing for the time being. Okay. And then this just looks so badly indented. To moi. It doesn't look much better. Yeah, that has to be on the top line because we don't have our parentheses. So okay, I'll just leave it like that. And cool. So now we're going to create a new folder and we're going to call this assets. So if we come up here into our source folder, we can create a new folder and call this assets. And then we'll put our spinner into this folder. So where we'll get our spinner from is Brad Traversy's GitHub repo. So we'll just go to GitHub Brad Traversy and we'll grab that spinner. So we're here on Brad Traversy's GitHub repo and we're going to grab his spinner. So thanks, Brad. So we'll come in here, we'll find the repository, which is going to be GitHub Finder. And it's the GitHub Finder app. And then we'll go down and find his Bum bum bum. His spinner. So components, assets now. Yeah. Where is your assets file, boy? So. Oh, he put it in layout. Okay, so layout is in components. Sorry, okay, so layout, assets, spinner. So we want this spinner, so I'm going to download it. So I'll just go into it here and then we can click download. And now we got the spinner. And download. Because I did not see it download. Let's just check the downloads. No. Your girl doesn't see it. So we'll go back here. I did this a different way before. What did I do? What did I do? Download. Let's just see if I can grab it. No. Okay, so what did I do last time? Let's try and open it somewhere else. I don't think I have GitHub Desktop installed on this computer. So save. Let's just try and save it. Oh, and it does save it as a GIF. Cool. So we'll save to downloads. That's what I did last time. Cool. And we will replace it because I have my other spinner copied into the folder I need it in. So now we will copy this spinner. Downloads. And just drag it on over and pop it into that folder. So there we go. Great. So we have an assets folder. I think it being at the top level is fine. That's normally where I would have my assets anyway. It's wherever you want to store. You just need to reference the path, the file path correctly then when you're using it. So now we need a spinner component. So I'll add this into layout. So say spinner.jsx and rfce to start off our spinner, our function there, our component function declaration, and then we'll import the spinner from assets and spinner.gif. And then we'll add this in. So in here in our return, I like to add my parentheses here. So we'll come in here to our return and then I'll add an image. First I'll add a div just to house the image. So div with a class name of width 100 and height, or no, mt 20. So margin top of 20. And then in here now we will add our image. And I'll add some properties here, some straw properties. So we'll give it a width, and the width will be 180. I'll give it a class name, and I'll text center and mx auto. So margin of auto, and then I'll also just drop these down for readability. Class name, I will add a source tag, and the source is going to be the spinner that we've imported. Spinner. And then we want the alt text to be loading. And then we can self-close this image tag. So cool, let's save. Stretch, guys. So now in our user results, we can import and use this spinner. So when we just start using it, it'll auto import. So we'll just use it, spinner, and self close that, and we can see that that brought in the spinner from layout spinner. So just, yes, this S here, we want it to match the import because that's hooking up to our import there. So we'll say lowercase s, and then let's just have a look at what's going on in our component here. So here we have our GitHub Finder, great. And let's reload the page and see what happens. Great, so we got our spinner for a moment there, which is brilliant. That's all we want. Very fancy spinner. But yeah, it shows something is happening. I think I'd prefer a more classical spinner because that one just looks, oh, didn't mean to put my chair down. Because that one just looks a bit mad, but that's fine. we'll live with that. So just watching the video as always. Okay, so now next we're going to display the user item. So rather than having the user login being displayed in our user results list here, we are now going to create a user item component and do that work in the component and insert the component in here like we did with the spinner. So that's, you want to compartmentalize your logic, what's going on. So here we have a specific user being displayed. We can put that into its own component. So that's what we're going to do. We're just taking it step by step and taking it slow here. So here in our users, we'll create another folder and we'll call this user item, a component, sorry. So user item.jsx. And then we will just do RFCE to create a standard user item. I'll come in here to my div and just say user item for the time being. And then back here in our user results, we will use this user item. So I'll import it. So import user item, yeah, from user item. So now down here where we have our H3, we can use our user item instead. And because we're mapping over the list of users here and we're going to have each user come in, we need to give it a key value so it knows which user is which one. You'll get an error if you don't have a key when you're mapping over something in React. So we say user.id and just save. And self-close this tag here. So now if we go back and take a look at our GitHub Finder, yeah, we just see that text that I put into the user item component. So we can see here that it's looping, and it's looping for the amount of times that we have our users. So we have 30 of them, so there's 30 here. But all that we've put into our user item component at the moment is the text user item. So that's why that gets duplicated 30 times. But we'll fix that now in a moment. So now what we want to do is within our user, we want to take in our user. And we'll also add prop types and define these prop types. So we will just get going on defining it and then it'll work itself. So we'll say user item dot prop types equals prop types dot object. So what we've said here so far is that we're going to have a user prop which has the prop type of is required. So we're just saying that this object, well, it's an object that is required. So it didn't automatically import first, so we'll just do that ourselves. So we'll import prop types from prop types, which is just inbuilt into React, I think. So we can say what else we'd like to take from this user item as it comes in. So what we want to take from it is the login and the avatar. So avatar URL. So now in here, if we instead display this login, we should be able to see what we had initially, which is just a different login name. So login and save, and let's have a look at our browser and see what happens now. So let's reload. Let's go to our console here. Cannot read property undefined of login. So I'm not passing it in, am I? That's what it is. So we've defined that we want to take this user here, but I think in my user results I didn't pass it in. So yes, I need to pass in the props of user. So I'll say user is equal to, and we want to pass over the user here. And save, and now let's see. So there we go. So now that we've passed through the user, we can deconstruct it on the other side in the user item because it's been passed through, and we've asked to display the login part of that user object. So great, that's all working. So in our user item, Brad has said we have a lot of CSS, and you can copy it from GitHub. So let's go back to GitHub and do that. So we'll go to GitHub. And repositories. And then in here we want to go back to our GitHub Finder app. And we will come down to source, components, users, user item. And here's all the CSS he was talking about. So I will just copy this. And let's copy it from each of the parentheses. And then I'll explain what it is when we go into the user item. So this is where this is going to go. Okay. So basically, and it seems that we have one error, which is link is not defined. Cool, so we must have also copied a link, and we need to just import that. So we will import link from React Router DOM. And if I'm not mistaken, this needs to be in parentheses. Let's see what our terminal says now. Yeah, link is not defined. Let's scroll down to the bottom. Yes, yeah. So when we're importing this from React Router DOM, link needs to be in these curly brackets. And now if we say if we shouldn't have a problem. So there we go. Compiled successfully. Great. I had a feeling I should have went with my gut instinct there. Sometimes that happens. And look at that, guys. So now that we have the bit of styling, we're asking to show the picture and the name, and then we have a visit profile link. So that's cool. Awesome. That's hilarious. Like, you can just see people's pictures. It's so funny. It's just public information. Well, yeah, I guess it is. So you've decided to upload it, same as my own picture. So here we go. Now we have our return statement. So what we have defined here is a card. So I'll just compare both of these so we can talk through what's going on. seeing as I just copied and pasted. So here we have a card. This is our inbuilt Tailwind config, Tailwind CSS applied classes that do things when you just call it the class name, and then you don't need to write a corresponding CSS file. It's all included in this Tailwind CSS package. And then we also have Daisy UI, which again is just another styling that you can add these classes and it automatically adds the CSS for you. So we have a card with a shadow. You can see the shadow on it there. Compact side and background base of 100. So that's just defining this card. It's the top level div. Then inside we're saying we want our items to be in a row, flex row. We want the items to be in the center, space of 4, and the card body. And then we have another div inside here, and we can see this is the avatar. So this is a div within our card, and this div has a parent element called avatar. So avatar is going to be creating this little picture for us. And then we can see within that we have rounded full. So we want it to be, this div element to be a rounded full element with a shadow, a width and a height. And then inside that then we have our image. And the alt text is profile for that image. So that's just the image that we see there. And that's coming straight from our props, our avatar URL, which is coming in from our user results, and we're passing it through within the props to the user item component. So once we've closed off all those divs for the various parent elements here, so we have our rounded body, our avatar closing div, just an empty div there, and then we have our second empty div, which is including our second aspect here. So then we can see we have our card title, which is just a H2, and that's our login name that we want to be our title. And then we have our link, and our link is saying we want it to be text-based content and text opacity of 40. So that's why this is grey, because the opacity is turned down. And the link just says visit profile, and the link is going to the URL user login. And the reason we can just do /user here is because we already added our base URL and said what we wanted that to point to, which was the GitHub API. So this should just go to the GitHub API /user /login. Well, the login being the login name, because here we are injecting in the name that's coming through in the prop. So in this case, login, here we can see it's also our card title, and it's also coming in the props that we pass through from our user results. We've deconstructed a sub part of that object, the user object, which is the login. So that's what we're telling it here. Within user we have this other object, and these are the bits we want to take out. So from here, say for this example here, caged, his URL that we can visit is going to be for githubapi.com /user /caged. This will evaluate to the same name as the login name. And that's how we populate that URL, because that's the API backend that we need to hit in order to go and visit his profile. So perfect. Or the URL, I should say. This is just a URL. Okay, cool. And one more thing to check is, because we have added in our different classes, this should be responsive. Because we've added in our, so we already seen it get responsive there. So we can see when we scroll to a smaller screen, we go to one screen. Then we jump out to 3 columns, and then we go to 2. So perfect. We can see that responsive aspect there coming to life. So perfect. Why on a medium screen it goes to 2? That surely seems wrong to me. So what we'd actually want is in our user results. Yes, so this should be MD, sorry. And that makes more sense then. So then when we have a medium, we want it to be 2. And then on a large, we want it to be 3 and 4. Okay, cool. Let's see, is 4. Yeah, so on an extra large then we want the columns to be 4. So okay, great, we can see that working, so awesome. So at the moment we just have our state right in our user results file here. And what we'd prefer to do is move our state to a context, because a context is where you can keep track of all your state. If you want to use the useContext, if you're just doing within a component state, well then you could keep it within the component, but because we're doing fetches and stuff, it's just cleaner to have it in a context file. So we'll do that now, and if you need to use context as well. Cool, so now we're going to set up our GitHub context. Excuse me for yawning. Yeah, so previously we've used useState within this component, but we can use reducers to do this, to manipulate our state. So it's good if you want to scale your application. Okay, so we're going to create a new folder here now. So within our source file and within our components, in here we will create a new folder and we'll call this context. And this should actually be at the source level, so we'll just move it up there. So yes, let's move it. It's not within our components, it's just going to be our context outside. So we'll create that file outside. And then in here we will create another folder called GitHub. Because at the moment we're going to have a GitHub context, but then later we're also going to add an alert context. So within GitHub here, let's create a new file and we'll call this GitHub context.jsx. So we'll import create context from React, and now we can create a variable called GitHub context, and create context. And now we can bring in our token and our URL and use them to hit that API and store it in our context instead. So we'll say const GitHub URL and this is going to be equal to the URL that we had in our process environments file. So it was React app GitHub URL, and then we'll also add another one, const, and this will be token. And we'll change the last part here as well to token. So then what we'll do is, oh no, the way we had it, please, was perfect. Thank you. Token. And over here, token. Okay. And then what we want to do is export const GitHub provider, and then we can provide this context to other components with the state. And what we want to provide is the children that are passed into this GitHub provider. So we'll also bring in use state here, and we'll use that. So, oh, I didn't mean to delete what I was currently doing there. So I'll just comma and import use state from React as well. Perfect. So for now we're going to use state, but we could also use reducer, which we will give a go at that later on. So in our user results here, we have two pieces of state being tracked. So we can copy these for the moment and move them into our GitHub context here within our provider. So now we have our user state being tracked and our loading state being tracked. And this is going to be accessible from anywhere in the application. We also want to bring in our fetch users function because we want to do the fetching within the context. And we'll take the whole function, not part of it. And if you're not sure where this function ends, well, it should just be at the closing curly parentheses, but you have this cool tool where you can collapse and just make sure that you're taking the whole function there. So that's a handy tool just to make sure. Some functions get really big, they shouldn't get too long, but some might get quite long. So it's good to use that button. Or use that button is what I said. So now we can add this into our GitHub context underneath our state here. Perfect. So we have a wait, and what we would like to fetch from here now is we have this stored in a variable here. So this is our GitHub URL. We can just use this instead because we've changed the name here, so that's perfect. Like so. And also for our token, we just want GitHub token here, so we'll get rid of the first part because we've defined these. This was the same. If we go back and have a look there, our process.env React app GitHub token is this whole thing, and that's now equal to just this keyword. So we can use just GitHub token in place of this big long thing and save our reference. So now we have our fetch users, so we're fetching the users. Now we haven't run this function yet, so we'll have to actually call it in order to say, okay, I want to fetch the users. Sometimes you gotta cross your legs. Yeah, so here we have our fetch users function, but we're not actually calling it at the moment. But what this is doing is it's going off to our GitHub URL, which is our API that we can hit with a / of users. And then from there, we're setting our authorization token to the GitHub token so we can get back 30 as opposed to 10. And then what we want to do is, or how many times we can hit that API. And then we have our data being assigned here, which we're just assigning to a response.json. And we're setting our users with that piece of state, setting this users variable to data. And then we're also setting the loading to false. So then what we want to return from here is GitHub context dot provider and children. And we also list any information we'd like to pass into this GitHub provider. So we can provide this with a value property. So value equals, and what we want to pass in, I'll just move this up because that's a bit messy, and instead drop it down here. So we pass in this object and it's going to be users and loading our two stateful items here. So great, or pieces of context. So now we just need to export this whole context. So export default GitHub context. So now in our app.js, we need to wrap our components in order to tell it that we want to use this context. So we will import it. From context, yeah, and then GitHub, yeah, and then GitHub context, yeah, cool. So then we have to wrap everything that we want to be able to access this context in the GitHub context provider. So I'll just wrap everything. So anything within our app can use this. So we'll say GitHub provider. And we want that to wrap everything. And come down here and paste down below. And then we should have access to everything in the context. So if I reload and if we go to the React DevTools component, so here's components, and here's our GitHub provider wrapping everything. So great, and we can see our state here, and at the moment it's empty, and our loading, which is set to true on initialization, and this is just because we haven't actually run the fetch users yet. So now in our user results we can use this. So we'll import so actually one more thing we need to provide to the context here is that fetch users function, so we can actually use it elsewhere. So we'll pass that in as well. So I was just checking out what theme Brad is using, because I quite like it. I quite like it. He has better syntax highlighting than me. So let me just get rid of this and see if that fixes. Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, he still has better syntax highlighting than me in some instances. It's hard to get exactly what you want in a theme. Yeah. So all I'm talking about there is literally the color of my text. So you can change your theme and appearance. I've always found it difficult to find it because you do it so infrequently. Preferences and then color theme, yeah. So you can just change your color theme, like I'll change it here and then you'll see what I mean. So yeah, I just quite liked his one and I was trying to see what it was, but realistically doesn't matter. That's nice and colourful actually. I like the colours. So does everyone. It's like a long running thing. in coding. Themes are quite important. So now in our users results, in our user results we want to bring in this context. So instead of using useState, here we will use useContext, and then we will import that context. So now within our user results here, we can get rid of this state because we're not using that anymore, but now we'll pull out what we want from our context. So we'll pass in our object, equal this to useContext. And we can take out any of the values that we passed through. So we had loading users and our fetch. So we'll get our fetch users. And we'll also get our users and our loading. And the context we want to use is our GitHub context. So here we have our use effect, and we're already calling fetch users when the context loads, but this is coming from our context here, so we can get rid of the function declaration here, and this should just call our fetch users from our context. So we can see there now we still have our users. So it is indeed, so we can get rid of the function declaration within this component now, because we're holding it in state, we're holding it in the context, we're providing it to this component. So yeah, we're still displaying the same information, but everything has been moved to the context now, so that's great. Which is just where you'd sort of want to store something like this. It was just to show you how to get it up and running within your component. And now next we want to use reducers. So Brad has just shared an article, so I'm actually going to have a look. So Robin, W-I-E-R, U-C-H, what is a reducer in JavaScript React? So he said this is a very good article. Here we go. A German guy, or at least with a German URL. Hey Germans, love you guys. My cousins are from Germany. Hi guys, love you. Yeah, so great. Not that they'll probably ever watch this, but if they do, well, I'll just tell them. Girls, you got a shout out. So, fab. So let's have a read of this article together, because he said it's really good, and I'll include a link to this in the description box down below so you can have your own little read, and in the meantime we will just have a little look at this. So okay, so what is a reducer in JavaScript React Redux? The concept of a reducer became popular in JavaScript with the rise of Redux as state management solution for React. But no worries, you don't need to learn Redux to understand reducers. Yeah, so yeah, yes, React has reducers, and it's leveraged off the functionality that Redux used to do. So that's why Redux isn't really needed in React anymore. There's still instances where you might use it, but it's all built into React now. And they got it because Redux was filling in these gaps in the library, as far as I'm aware. Let's keep reading. Basically, reducers are there to manage state in an application. Okay, for instance, if a user writes something in a HTML input field, so I'll read slowly here because I read quickly and maybe that's not useful for everybody. So, for instance, if a user writes something in an HTML input field, the application has to manage this UI state, e.g. controlled components. So yeah, so if you write something into an input field, your app needs to remember what that person wrote. So that's a controlled component. Let's dive into the implementation details. In essence, a reducer is a function which takes two arguments, yes, the current state and an action, and returns based on both arguments a new state. Yes. In pseudocode function, it could be expressed as. So basically, your reducer is reducing down two things that you pass in, and it's giving you back one thing. That's why it's called a reducer, because you started with two and you end up with one. So the two things that you start with are your state. So the current state of the item. So say if it's a boolean, that would be true or false. The action. So if true, do this. If false, do this. The action will tell it what's the do this. What's the thing you wanted to do. And then when you use your reducer, you get back a new state. So the new state could be, false or true, or a new state that's being tracked. As an example, it would look like the following in JavaScript for the scenario of increasing a number by 1. So here we have a function. This is a reducer. It takes a state and an action. So the state is the current number, and the action is +1. No. So arrow function, it would look like the following for the same logic: state, action. So your state is your current number anyway, and your action would be, this should be add or something. Look, I'd like to see all of the code. Okay, so this is how we would run it. The reducer function is a pure function without any side effects. This means that given the same input, state and action, the expected output, new state, will always be the same. This makes reducer functions the perfect fit for reasoning about state changes and testing them in isolation. You can repeat the same test with the same input arguments as always, and always expect the same output. Okay, that's the essence. Yeah, so here we go. If we see it in more filled out a bit, it makes a bit more sense, because just like that one line, you weren't getting the action there, well, I wasn't seeing it, and my brain was like, well, I need to see the action. So that's the essence of a reducer function. However, we didn't touch the second argument. Okay, yeah, so they hadn't looked at the action yet. The action is normally defined as an object with a type property based on the type of the action. The reducer can perform conditional state transitions. So if we have a look at this reducer, and then I'll just stop there, because reading through this isn't highly productive. I don't think. I'm going to include the link down below. You can read it at your own pace and your own speed, but I'll explain this reducer. This is the common layout of a reducer. So you have your state and your action. We were missing our action before, so that was a bit confusing for me personally. So here we've defined an arrow function. This is an arrow function because we have our arrow here and we're equaling it to our parameters. We're saying this is a function that we want to run when we call this name, counter reducer. So we've defined our function here. Counter reducer is the name of it, and we've passed in our state and our action. So our state in this case is the count, or the current value of the count variable. So count could be 3, it could be 4. It's most likely going to be a number, because count indicates it's a number, but really it could be anything. It could be a boolean, it could be a string. We'll defer from the rest of the code what it is, but just because count is generally used as a word that represents a numerical value, I'm just extrapolating that it's going to be a number, but that's not proven. I just think that. And then the action, which doesn't really matter. Basically, we have a piece of state that we're tracking the state of. Let's just say it's 3. So then, or it could be 4, or it could be 2, depending on what the state is at that snapshot in time, what that state is actually holding, depending on other things that are going on. What did we initialize the state as? How many iterations of running this function have we done that might update the state? and what's the function that's updating the state, how is it updating the state. It could be adding 10, so then the state would only go from 0, say if it was initialized at 0 to 10. So yes, I'm speaking very like, ooh, because we haven't got into it yet, so I'm trying not to be too presumptuous and explain my way through this. So I hope this is working. Let me know. Okay, so we have our state and then our action. So this is our function. Then we have our action type. So this is what it means by the action is normally defined as an object with a type property. So this is an object, and in order to access a property of an object, you use the dot notation. So type is a property of this action object. So we can see action has type here, and it has different values for type. So type could be equal to increase, and this is the action. The action is increase here. And so if we pass through the state and the action, and then the action equals increase, so here we typed in, when we call the function, we say counter reducer 1 and increase, we pass in the string increase in here. It knows that this is the reducer you want to run, and it will run this part of the function. So what it will do is it will return count. So say we passed in 1 as count and add 1 to it. It will add 1. If we also passed in the action when we called this function of increase. So the way we would do that is like this. So if we wanted to call this, we would say counter reducer somewhere in our code. If we had this function and then we wanted to call it, we would say counter reducer. We would pass in the state. So say state generally will be still stored in that state object. You know, you're not going to just pass in the number 1, although you could. But what we're looking for is the state that's holding the number 1. So here we could have somewhere that count, was it count or counter? Yeah, just count. So here we could have let count equal 0 or 1. So let's just say 1, because I've been saying 1 the whole time. So count is equal to 1. So we pass in that count value, and then we also pass in increase. Well, and we would actually do it like type is equal to increase, but yes, like this. So we would say count was 0 and then the type and pass in that string of increase. And then it knows when it comes in, we've got 2 values and it's going to give us back 1 value. So what will return from this is as it comes down and executes this function, it will come in, it will realize that this is the reducer you want to run, not this one, not the action type of decrease, because we've passed in type of increase. And then it will just return count plus 1, and count plus 1 is going to be equal to 2. So it's going to return 2. That's what it will return, because this is count add 1, and we can see here the initial value for count that we passed in that was stored in state was 1. So 1 plus 1 is 2. So that's how that works. So cool, we'll just continue on with the video, and then you can continue with this in your own time. So what we're going to do is create our GitHub reducer file here. So within our context, we will create a new file called our GitHub reducer.jsx. Perfect. So we'll just define our basic reducer here. So we'll say const GitHub reducer, and this is going to take in a state and an action, and it's an arrow function. Perfect. So in here we want a switch statement, and this will depend on what we do with the action type that's passed in. So we'll say in the default state we just want to default state, we just want to return the state. So we'll flesh the rest of this out now in tomorrow's video when we continue with the 100 Days of Coding Challenge, day 95. Oh my god, I feel like I'm going to pass out from excitement. So please do like and subscribe if you've been following my journey. It just means the world to me. Really appreciate it. Still on about 100 subscribers. Which is fabulous. You know, I appreciate every single one of you that have subscribed. Thank you so much, like, really. And I just really hope that this will reach the people that it needs to reach to learn if some of this is going to be helpful. Maybe not the 100 days of code, because that was just me going through. If you're just sitting there and you're someone who, you know, has finished school and you have a bit of time, I think it's a great opportunity to just sit and listen to somebody talking about code. If it was me, I'd even play these going to bed, because you're getting all of that terminology. But more directed learning, I will be doing more directed learning and tutorials in the future. So just to let you guys know that as well. So look, have an absolutely wonderful day. As always, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Love you all. Thanks a mil. Bye guys.